All right, let's jump straight into today's explainer because this one plays out literally like a sci-fi thriller. We're looking at an ancient, mind-controlling scourge that has haunted humanity for millennia. I'm talking, of course, about rabies, the ultimate stealth assassin.
To really grasp why this microscopic monster is so terrifying, you have to look at its end goal. It makes its way into the victim's brain and objectively redirects their thoughts to suit its own needs. Think about that for a second. It literally takes over the host's brain, changing their behavior to force them to bite and spread the infection to others. It's a complete biological hijacking, and the host is just entirely at the mercy of the virus.
If you've ever read or seen the classic frontier story Old Yeller, you've actually witnessed a fictionalized but highly accurate depiction of this nightmare. The defining hallmark is hydrophobia. Now, that's not just a simple fear of water. We're talking about an intense, agonizing inability to swallow liquids because of severe throat spasms. The infected host desperately avoids drinking, which causes their own saliva to pool up, and that is what creates that iconic, terrifying foaming at the mouth effect.
We've actually been tracking this thing for a long time. I mean, 4,000 years ago, the laws of Eshnunna in ancient Iraq detailed heavy silver fines for owners whose rabid dogs bit someone. By the 1st century AD, the Roman scholar Celsus correctly figured out that dog saliva was transmitting the madness. Fast forward to 1804, and a scientist named Zinka definitively proved this saliva link by injecting it into healthy animals. But it wasn't until 1885 that Louis Pasteur developed the first vaccine. So for the vast majority of human history, we knew exactly how it spread, but we were just completely powerless to stop it.
And because we were powerless, our ancestors turned to some truly desperate, horrific measures. Ancient cures ranged from the mystical, like wearing this calcified hairball known as a madstone or literally holding the patient underwater, to the agonizing, like cauterizing bite wounds with red-hot irons to try and burn away the infection. Yet the grim reality is chillingly consistent. Once those symptoms actually appear, the mortality rate is nearly 100%.
The scientific name for this genus of virus is lyssavirus, which comes from the Greek word for madness. And it's pretty fitting that under an electron microscope, the virus literally looks like a bullet. But it doesn't act like a massive marching infantry that alerts your body's immune system. No, this virus operates like a stealth commando unit. It is a slow, silent bullet to the brain.
Let's trace its journey, because it's terrifyingly silent. First, it enters the muscle cells near the bite wound. Then, it latches onto the nerve cell axon highway. And it doesn't rush. It travels at a creeping pace of just about 3 millimeters an hour until it reaches the spinal cord. From there, it rapidly infects the brain, and finally, it travels back down to concentrate in the salivary glands, perfectly positioning itself for the next bite.
So how on earth does it do this without triggering your immune response? Well, its secret weapon is its G protein. This little glycoprotein acts like the ultimate cloaking device. It actively reduces host cell apoptosis, meaning it stops the infected cells from self-destructing. It mutes the production of interferons, which are basically the chemical alarms that alert neighboring cells. And it completely hides from the body's natural killer lymphocytes. Your immune system essentially has no idea it's under attack until the virus has already seized control of the central nervous system.
Once that brain is compromised, the true horror begins. The eminent 19th century neurologist Sir William Gowers left us this incredibly chilling description. He wrote, "The mental derangement is most intense. The frenzied patient may spit his saliva at those about him and often attempts to bite them, making occasional strange sounds in his throat which have been thought to resemble the barking of a dog. It is a complete, agonizing neurological breakdown."
Now, this breakdown usually goes one of two ways. The one Gowers described is the classic furious rabies, which gives you extreme paranoia, hyperactivity, and that overwhelming urge to bite. But in about 25% of cases, it manifests as paralytic rabies, resulting in a creeping, general paralysis. But listen, regardless of the path it takes, the endpoint is identical: a coma followed by inevitable death.
Which brings us to an absolutely pivotal moment in medical history. The year is 1885, and the brilliant French microbiologist Louis Pasteur enters this frantic race to stop the unstoppable. This part of our explainer really does play out like a historical thriller.
So, Pasteur theorized that a weakened or attenuated version of the virus could actually build immunity. But his process for making it was painstakingly dangerous. First, his team injected rabid dog saliva directly into a rabbit's brain.
After the rabbit died, they harvested the highly infectious spinal cord. Then, they dried these cords in sealed containers with potassium to slowly weaken the virus over a couple of weeks. Finally, they extracted this attenuated virus. Can you imagine? This was a perilous daily routine, literally handling a 100% lethal pathogen.
Then came the ultimate test. In July 1885, a 9-year-old boy named Joseph Meister was savagely mauled by a rabid dog and rushed to Paris. Pasteur faced a massive, ethically fraught gamble. Keep in mind, he wasn't even a medical doctor. But as he wrote himself, as the death of this child appeared inevitable, I decided, not without deep and severe unease, to try on Joseph Meister the procedure.
You can only imagine the tension in that laboratory. It must have been suffocating. Over 10 days, young Joseph received 13 doses of the experimental, progressively stronger vaccine emulsions. And against all odds, despite suffering 14 severe bite wounds from a known rabid dog, Joseph survived. For the very first time in human history, this deadly mind control virus had actually been defeated.
And we quickly found out it wasn't just a fluke. A few months later, in October 1885, a 15-year-old hero named Jean-Baptiste Dupil literally fought off a rabid dog to save 5 younger children. He sustained deep, terrible bites, traveled to Paris, received Pasteur's treatment, and he survived too. This was the critical confirmation case. Word spread like wildfire, and soon, desperate patients were flocking to Paris from all across Europe to get this miracle cure.
But here's a crazy detail. Even with the working vaccine, for decades, doctors still struggled to just accurately diagnose the disease. That finally changed in 1903, when Italian pathologist Adelchi Nigri discovered what we now call Nigri bodies. These are little round, red-staining dots found exclusively inside infected brain cells. For much of the 20th century, way before we had modern fluorescent antibody tests, spotting those tiny dots under a microscope was the definitive proof that a patient had succumbed to rabies.
So, how do we actually handle an exposure today? Well, because the virus hides inside your nerves and synaptic gaps, your body doesn't naturally produce antibodies until it's way too late. So the modern post-exposure prophylaxis protocol is all about flooding the zone. First, thorough wound cleansing. Second, on day 0, injecting hyperimmune serum right around the bite to give you immediate passive immunity. Third, you get a series of acquired immunity vaccines on days 0, 3, 7, and 14. This rapid-fire antibody flood stops the virus in its tracks before it can ever reach the brain.
Actually, quick side note here, but an absolutely crucial medical reminder. Even if an animal isn't rabid, bite wounds require immediate, serious medical attention. Dogs and cats carry some really dangerous bacteria, like Pasteurella multicida, which causes severe wound inflammation, and Capnocytophaga canemorsis, which can literally trigger life-threatening sepsis, especially in the elderly or immunocompromised. So please, never just brush off an animal bite. Now, despite all of these incredible scientific triumphs we've talked about, I do need to ground this explainer with a tragic reality. 55,000. According to the World Health Organization, that is the devastating number of people, a heartbreaking majority of them children, who still die from rabies every single year. Why is that number still so high? It really comes down to a tragic economic barrier. The modern human diploid cell vaccine that we use in developed nations costs about $500. It requires just 4 simple arm injections and is relatively painless. But in developing nations, a lot of people are forced to rely on the older Semple vaccine, which is derived from sheep brains. Sure, it only costs about $5, but it requires 7 or more intensely painful injections directly into the abdomen. And honestly, far too often, victims don't even have access to that. Which leaves us with a pretty profound, maybe even frustrating thought. Knowing we have the exact science and the medical protocols to stop it cold, how long will we allow this terrifying, ancient mind control virus to steal 55,000 lives every single year? It's a literal nightmare from antiquity that we are inexplicably allowing to dictate our present. Thank you so much for joining me for today's explainer. Keep asking questions, and I'll catch you next time.